The Harbor Chart House. Episode 3, The Green Thread Folders. The folded linen made a dry, quiet whisper as Nora Venn lifted the shallow box from its shelf in the print cupboard. It was not quite the sound of paper. Paper usually answered movement with a light crackle or a clean sliding breath. This was softer and heavier, a layered sound made by cloth resting against cloth, with old printed sheets folded between. When Nora drew the box toward her, the contents settled by a fraction, and the whisper passed from one end to the other like a hand smoothing a coverlet. She held the box level against her palms. The cupboard shelf was just below shoulder height, high enough that she had lifted carefully, but not so high that the weight surprised her. Even so, she waited for a moment before turning. Her elbows remained close to her sides. Her shoulders lowered again. The shallow wooden box was broad rather than deep, and the ferry charts inside gave it the steady, spread-out weight of something meant to be carried with both hands. Behind her, the narrow print cupboard opened into the long map room. Beyond that lay the repair room, where the central work table had already been cleared for the evening. The route was simple. From the shelf, through the cupboard doorway, along the near side of the map room, and into the repair room. Later, the sorted charts would return by the same path. Nora had no reason to go farther into the building tonight. The model room would remain closed. The window gallery was not part of this shift. Even the small kitchen, where she had left a mug beside the sink, could wait until she had set the box down. She turned with the careful, economical pace of someone who knew that carrying flat things was easiest, when nothing was hurried. The print cupboard smelled faintly of pasteboard, cotton tape, and the dry mineral coolness of the stone wall behind its shelves. Its cabinets were painted a soft gray that had worn smooth around the brass label holders. Some drawers held printed notices and spare catalog slips. Others contained rolled duplicates, tide tables, and packets of maps made for public handling. The shallow boxes occupied the middle shelves, where a person could reach them without stretching too far or bending too low. This one bore a blue pencil label in Jonas Reed's compact handwriting. Ferry charts, cloth and paper, mixed. Below that, in smaller letters, he had added, "Sort when there is a clear table." The instruction was ordinary and exact. It did not ask Nora to repair everything, or even to decide the future of every chart in the box. The unfinished task was simply to separate the different kinds of copies, put them into a useful order, and identify which cloth-backed charts were ready for folders, and which required further preparation. Nora carried the box into the long map room. The room had changed since her first evening in the chart house. The long table no longer felt like a landmark she needed in order to understand the building. It had become what it was, a broad working surface between one room and another. Along one side, the drawers of flat maps rested in their familiar ranks. Along the other, tall windows looked toward the inner harbor. The blue cloth walking map she had repaired on her first shift was no longer on the long table. It had been approved and placed where it could be used without strain. The transparent rain overlay from her second evening was also resting in its proper sleeve, ready to be laid over the harbor plans when needed. Both pieces had moved beyond the uncertain stage of work. Nora did not need to check them. Their finished state belonged to the house now. She passed through the room without stopping. Outside the windows, the evening had reached the harbor gradually. The stone of the inner quay still held some of the day's pale color, but the water had deepened towards slate blue. Across it, the ferry lights had begun their regular pattern. A low white light moved along the short route, paused where the landing stood beyond the edge of the window frame, and later returned. Farther out, another pair of lights crossed at a measured distance. There was no need to follow either one. The routes would appear again in printed color inside the box. Nora entered the repair room and set the shallow box on the cleared central table. She lowered it in stages, allowing the near edge to touch first, then easing the rest down until the whole wooden base rested flat. The linen inside answered with another soft whisper. A folded corner lifted slightly and settled. Nora stood with both hands on the sides of the box until the weight had fully left her arms. Her body had found the pace of the evening on the walk from the cupboard. It was a quiet, working pace, neither tired nor brisk. She had spent the afternoon at another bench, reviewing a set of municipal plans under even light, and her hands still held the memory of small movements. Her fingers were warm. Her back welcomed the change from sitting to standing. She rolled one shoulder once, then the other, and felt the last tightness ease. The repair room was ready, but not yet in use. On the central table lay a square of clean cotton cloth, a low tray, 2 soft brushes, several blank slips, and a length of smooth blotting paper. Nora's bone folder rested near the upper edge of the cloth. Its surface had been polished by years in her former workshop, and by the years before that, when it had belonged to another hand. She had brought it with her for each evening shift, though tonight she did not expect to use it immediately. Sorting would come before any flattening, and looking before either. At the far end of the table, 6 empty spaces had been left in a row. Jonas's note had mentioned that a delivery was expected before the evening grew late. But there was nothing to do about that yet. The spaces were ready. The receipt lay beneath a small glass weight. When the repaired folders arrived, Nora could inspect the count, sign in blue-black ink, and place them there. Until then, the clear rectangles of table remained only clear rectangles. She slipped off her light cardigan and hung it over the back of the chair nearest the wall. The room was warmer than the passage and cupboard, though the warmth was mild. One of the tall windows stood open by the width of 2 fingers. Through it came the harbor's settled mixture of sounds: water against stone, an occasional soft vibration from a ferry engine, and the light tap of rigging somewhere beyond the sheltered quay. Nothing in the sound asked for attention. Nora returned to the box. Its lid was made of heavy board covered in faded gray cloth. She placed one hand at each side and lifted it straight upward, so the edges would not drag across the contents. A fine line of dust showed where the lid had met the lower half. She set the lid on a cleared side table, inner face upward. The charts were folded in several different ways. Some had been reduced to neat rectangles with sharp, paper-made creases. Others were thicker at the folds, their linen backing making broad, rounded hinges. A few showed narrow bands of printed color near their exposed edges: muted red, blue, yellow, and a green that had softened toward olive. One paper chart near the top carried a date in bold type. Beneath it, the corner of a cloth-backed copy had been marked in blue pencil with a small temporary number. Nora did not remove anything yet. She looked over the visible layers, noting the difference between stiffness and flexibility. Paper copies held their folded form even where the upper edges rose away from the stack. The linen-backed charts relaxed more readily, their folds opened by a few millimeters under their own weight, and the woven fibers along the edges caught the room's light. The box contained working copies. That was clear before she read a single title. These charts had not spent their lives lying flat in drawers. They had been folded, carried, opened on counters and tables, and folded again. Their cloth backs had allowed them to endure that use. The paper copies among them were likely later prints, inserts, or replacements. Sorting the 2 kinds would make the first useful distinction. Nora drew the low tray closer. Its bottom was lined with dark paper, so that pale lint and loose fibers would be easy to see. The larger brush had long, soft bristles for lifting surface dust, without driving it farther into the weave. The smaller brush could guide detached fibers into the tray. Neither tool would alter the charts. At this stage, Every action could be reversed simply by stopping and placing an item back where it had been. She moved the blank slips to the left side of the cloth, paper. Cloth backed. Date uncilia. She wrote the 3 headings in pencil, leaving room below each one. Then she added another slip for root colors, drawing 4 short lines in red, blue, yellow, and green with the colored pencils Jonas had set out. The marks were only working guides. Once the dates and route names were visible, the charts could be arranged more precisely. She did not yet open the first fold. The opening of a box had its own useful pause. Before individual items began to claim attention, there was a moment when the collection could still be understood as a whole. Nora had learned to keep that moment. It prevented the first unusual crease or bright printed line from becoming more important than it was. She counted the visible folded packets without lifting them. 12 near the top, though some might contain more than 1 sheet. 3 clearly paper. 5 clearly cloth-backed. 4 uncertain until handled. Beneath those, another layer could be seen along the right side of the box. The evening's work had boundaries now. She would separate paper from linen-backed charts. She would brush away only what was loose. She would arrange the copies by the colors of their ferry routes, and then by printed date. She would make no attempt to erase the history of their handling. Any fold that needed support could be noted for later. Any chart that required more thought could remain in the repair room overnight, resting flat beneath clean cloth. The shallow box did not have to be empty by the end of the shift. That mattered. A mixed box could become an ordered box without every object reaching its final place. Tonight's task was one stage in preparing the ferry charts for use, and the stage was modest enough to be completed with patience. Nora turned the top cloth-back chart just enough to see the direction of its fold. The linen moved with a dry murmur. Its exposed edge was soft with use but not frayed. A few pale fibers rested loosely along one corner, ready to be brushed into the tray when the chart was opened. The printed face remained hidden, except for a narrow blue line at the margin and the final letters of a landing name. She let the fold settle again. Across the room, the harbor light shifted on the window glass. A ferry passed through the visible strip of water, its lamps moving at an even speed. The white reflections lengthened, broke gently in the wake, and shortened again. By the time the sound reached the open window, the lights were already nearing the farther landing. Nora watched only long enough to notice the regularity. Then she lowered the linen chart onto the clean cotton cloth, keeping its folded shape intact. It would be the first chart of the first round, but she had not begun that round yet. For the moment it rested apart from the mixed stack, its blue root line showing at one edge. She placed the larger brush beside it, bristles turned away from the cloth. The 6 clear spaces at the far end of the table remained ready. The receipt waited beneath its glass weight. The tray's dark lining was empty. The bone folder lay quiet above the work area, its familiar pale surface catching a narrow band of lamplight. From the print cupboard to the repair room, the route was known. The box had arrived safely. The materials were in reach. One folded ferry chart rested on the cloth, still closed, with nothing asked of it yet except that it remain where Nora had placed it. She drew the chair nearer to the table and sat down. Her feet settled flat on the floor. Her hands rested for a moment on either side of the folded linen. Beyond the window, the ferry lights continued their short, familiar crossing. And inside the repair room, the dry whisper of the chart faded into stillness. Nora placed her left hand lightly on the folded chart and brought the larger brush within reach of her right. Before opening the linen-backed sheet, she turned it so that its broadest fold ran parallel to the edge of the table. This gave each section somewhere to rest as it opened. She lifted the first panel with 2 fingers beneath the cloth rather than pulling at its corner. The chart unfolded with a soft, dry whisper. Its printed face showed a pale field crossed by a blue ferry route. The cloth beneath gave the sheet a subdued flexibility. Where an ordinary paper chart might have risen stiffly from its creases, this one settled in shallow curves over the cotton cloth. Nora opened only 2 panels at first. Along the fold, several pale fibers had loosened from the linen backing. They were not attached strongly enough to be laid down, and there was no reason to press them into the surface. She held the brush almost flat and moved it from the center of the fold toward the waiting tray. The bristles carried the fibers without catching the weave. A few settled against the tray's dark lining. That was the first visible change of the evening. The fold was clear, and the loose cream-colored fibers could now be seen in the tray, rather than along the chart. Nora brushed once more, using less pressure than the weight of the brush itself. Nothing else moved. She stopped. The woven backing remained firm beneath the printed paper. Its threads crossed evenly, though the ridges had softened wherever the chart had been folded many times. Near one edge, the blue route line disappeared beneath the next closed panel. Nora did not follow it yet. She placed a small weight wrapped in smooth paper near the open corner, not to flatten the chart, but to keep the already open section from drifting back over her hand. Then she lifted the next fold. More of the route appeared. A title block occupied the lower right corner, and beneath the title stood a printed date. Nora copied the year onto a blank slip. She added the route name exactly as printed, then set the slip above the chart where it could travel with the sheet without touching its surface. She ran no finger along the line. Looking was enough. The cloth backing made the chart easy to distinguish from the paper copies still in the box, but Nora checked the edges as well. At one margin, the printed sheet ended a fraction before the linen did. The narrow exposed border showed the weave clearly. A plain, closely worked fabric the color of oat straw. She closed the chart again by reversing the opening sequence. The last panel opened became the first panel returned. Each fold found its former place without pressure from the bone folder. The chart went to the right of the working cloth, beneath the slip marked "cloth backed." Nora drew the next item from the box. This one felt different as soon as its weight reached her hands. It was lighter, and its corners held themselves more sharply. When she raised the top fold, the sheet answered, with the clean crackle of paper, rather than the murmur of linen. She opened enough to see the reverse. No woven backing showed beneath the printed surface. The paper was thick and serviceable, with a slight gloss that caught the overhead lamp. A red route line ran across the visible panel. Nora found the title and date, recorded both, then placed the copy to her left beneath the paper slip. The 2 small groups had begun. They were hardly groups yet. One chart on either side, but the mixed contents of the box now had a direction. Cloth-backed working copies would rest to the right. Paper charts would rest to the left. Items whose dates could not be found without fuller examination would remain near the center. Nora took out a third chart. It was linen-backed, marked in green, and folded into a long, narrow packet. A fourth was paper, with a yellow route and a date 4 years later than the red one. The fifth contained 2 sheets folded together. Nora separated them without sliding their faces across each other, and found that one was a paper timetable diagram, while the other was a blue route chart backed with cloth. She made each decision from something visible: the texture of a reverse, the exposed weave of a margin, the way a fold bent under its own weight, the printed date in the title block, the colored line named in the root key. Each time she opened a cloth-backed chart, she positioned the tray beside the fold. Loose lint and detached fibers moved into it under the soft brush. Nothing firmly attached was disturbed. She did not brush the printed areas simply because a brush was available. She used it only where the pale fragments could already be seen. The dark tray slowly acquired a delicate scatter. Some fibers were straight and fine. Others had curled into tiny hooks after years within a fold. A few grains of ordinary dust gathered among them. Against the dark paper, even the smallest pieces were distinct. The charts themselves looked quieter after brushing. Their surfaces had not become new, and their folds had not been pressed away. They had merely lost what was no longer part of them. Nora arranged the cloth-backed copies in 4 loose rows according to root color. Blue nearest the window, then red, yellow, and green. Within each color she placed the earliest printed date at the top and later dates below it. When 2 copies shared a date, she left them side by side until their issue numbers could be compared. The paper charts received the same arrangement on the opposite side of the table. As the rows developed, the ferry routes began to appear as a modest system rather than a mixed stack. Blue lines crossed the short inner harbor distance. Red lines curved toward the outer quay. Yellow and green routes touched other ordinary landings shown in compact type. The charts offered no journey that Nora needed to imagine. Their purpose was practical: to show where the ferries went, where they stopped, and how one printed service differed from another. Outside, a low engine note moved across the harbor and faded. Nora looked toward the window only when her hands were empty. A pair of ferry lights passed through the visible water, steady and familiar. One white reflection trembled below them, stretching and gathering as the surface moved. Then the sound of the covered passage reached the repair room. It was not sudden. A few measured footsteps crossed the stone, followed by a light knock at the open outer door. "Nora, in the repair room," she called. Anika Saul appeared at the doorway carrying a flat parcel against both forearms. She had wrapped it in plain gray paper and tied it with cotton tape. A narrow sample of dark green thread had been looped through the knot so the parcel could be identified without opening it. 6 folders, Anika said. "All dry and ready. Right on time." Anika brought the parcel to the far end of the table, where the 6 clear spaces waited. Nora moved the glass weight from the receipt while Anika untied the cotton tape. The wrapping opened without tearing. Inside lay 6 repaired folders, each made from firm conservation board covered at the spine with linen. Dark green thread passed through the folds in an even line of stitches. The color was deep and quiet, almost black where it entered the board, and clearer where each short length crossed the pale linen. Nora counted the folders as Anika set them down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She checked that each opened freely, and that no knot stood proud enough to press against a chart. The boards lifted without strain. The inner surfaces were clean. The green stitches held the spines firmly while allowing the folders to open in a shallow supportive angle. "They'll take the working copies without forcing the folds," Anika said. Nora looked at the depth of one spine and then at the cloth-backed rows. "Yes, there's room for the linen." Anika slid the receipt toward her. Nora signed on the indicated line in blue-black ink. Jonas's blue pencil count already stood in the margin. 6 folders expanged. She added the date, waited a moment for the ink to settle, and returned the receipt. "That's everything," she said. Anika folded the gray wrapping around the cotton tape. "Good night, then." "Good night." "Thank you." Anika left by the same covered passage. Her footsteps diminished across the stone, and in a little while the repair room held only the harbor sounds again. The delivery required nothing further. 6 folders had arrived. Nora had inspected them, signed for them, and placed them in the 6 prepared spaces. Anika was on her way home, and the receipt had gone with her. Nora returned to the open box. She lifted another linen-backed chart and found a red root line at its margin. 2 pale fibers clung loosely to the central fold. She guided them into the tray, recorded the date, and placed the chart below the earlier red copy. The work resumed at the same pace it had held before the knock. Chart by chart, the mixed stack grew lower. Some distinctions were immediate. One paper copy was printed on a cream sheet that had become slightly darker at the edges. Another was a later, whiter issue with a revised typeface. The cloth-backed copies varied in thickness, because some had been mounted on finer linen and others on a sturdier weave. Nora noted these differences only where they affected handling. She was sorting useful objects, not ranking them by age or beauty. When she reached an uncertain packet, she opened it over the center of the cloth. The backing was linen, but a repair strip of thin paper covered part of the reverse. Nora tilted the sheet beneath the lamp until the weave became visible at the outer margin. She marked it as cloth-backed and added a small note about the old strip. The strip was stable. It could remain for later examination. She set that chart in the yellow row. Another copy lacked a clear year on its exposed panels. Rather than unfolding the whole sheet merely to satisfy the order of the row, Nora placed it beneath date uncilia. The temporary position was useful and fully reversible. It could wait until there was room to open it without overlapping the other charts. By now, the table showed several kinds of order at once. Paper lay to the left. Cloth-backed copies lay to the right. Root colors formed separate rows. Printed dates advanced gently from top to bottom. The dark tray held the loose fibers removed from the folds. At the far end, the new folders stood aligned, their green thread spines facing Nora. The bone folder remained untouched. There had been no need for it. Pressing the old folds would have moved the work into another stage, and this first round was concerned with separation, surface tidying, and sequence. Nora left the familiar tool where it was, pale and smooth beneath the lamp. She removed the final chart from the upper layer of the box. It was one of the thicker working copies. The folded packet bore a blue root mark near the lower edge, and its linen backing had relaxed enough that the top panel rose slightly when Nora placed it on the cloth. Below it, the box still contained several charts in a second layer. Nora did not reach for those yet. She opened the thick blue route copy one panel at a time. The first fold held only a few loose fibers. She brushed them into the tray. The second revealed part of the harbor outline and the edge of a printed key. The third showed the short line between the Market Quay and the North Landing. She paused to shift the paper-wrapped weight, giving the opened panels broader support. Under the lamplight, the printed blue remained clear. The cloth around it carried the softened signs of frequent handling. Rounded folds, a smooth margin, and several pale curves crossing the surface near the root. Nora saw them, but did not decide what they meant. Not during the first round. She recorded the date from the title block and placed the slip above the chart. The sheet could remain open now. It was supported, clean of loose fibers, and separated from the rest of the blue route row without being removed from the sorting sequence. On the next round, Nora could look more closely at the pale curves and compare them with the root key already visible beside them. For the moment, she gathered the other sorted charts into their loose, orderly groups. She did not return them to the box, and she did not place any of them in the green thread folders. Those choices belonged to later work. She merely adjusted the slips so that each remained easy to read and moved the brush tray away from the open chart's edge. The 6 repaired folders waited at the far end of the table. Their boards were closed. Their inner surfaces remained empty. The green stitches formed 6 even lines along the spines, ready to hold whichever cloth-backed charts were approved for them. Nora rested her hands on the table. The first layer of the box had become distinct rows. Paper and cloth no longer lay mixed together. Loose fibers had been brushed into the dark tray. Roots and dates could be followed without lifting every chart again. One blue route working copy remained open beneath the steady lamp, its printed key beside the pale arcs worn across its surface. Outside the window, the ferry lights made another regular crossing. Inside, nothing needed to be hurried. The first round had prepared the table for a closer look, and the open chart rested exactly where that closer look could begin. Nora drew the open blue route chart a little nearer, moving the cotton cloth beneath it rather than pulling the chart itself. The paper-wrapped weight remained at the upper corner. It held no fold flat and pressed no worn place. Its only purpose was to keep the open panels from drifting while she looked. The chart lay in a series of shallow rises and hollows, following the old linen hinges beneath the printed sheet. Near the center, the short ferry route ran from the market quay to the north landing. The line was blue, though not the dark blue of Jonas's pencil. It had the slightly softened color of practical printing, clear enough to distinguish from the red, yellow, and green surfaces, but gentle under lamplight. At either end, a small open circle marked a landing. Between them, the route curved across the printed water in one modest arc. Several pale curves crossed the same part of the chart. Nora had noticed them during the first round without assigning them any meaning. Now she lowered herself into the chair and let her gaze move from the marks to the printed key, then back again. The pale curves did not have the edges of tide marks. They had no darker rim and no tide-shaped spread through the paper. They did not resemble paste, oil, or any of the other substances that sometimes entered a working collection through ordinary use. There was no wrinkling around them. The linen beneath had not tightened or drawn away. Nor were the marks quite on the surface. They were changes in the surface. Nora angled the lamp by a small degree. She did not bring it closer, because stronger light was unnecessary. A lower angle was enough to let the texture show. The unworn paper gave back a soft, even reflection. Across the pale curves, that reflection narrowed and brightened. The fibers had been burnished smooth. In some places, the blue printing had lightened with them, not because anything had been spilled or wiped across the line, but because repeated contact had gradually polished the high points of the paper. Nora looked toward the printed key. A blue sample line appeared beside the words Market Quay, North Landing. Beneath it, the route was described as the short inner crossing. The key gave the two landing names, the route color, and the ordinary service mark used on that issue of the chart. She followed the information with her eyes only. From the blue sample in the key, her gaze moved to the open circle at the market quay. From there it followed the printed route across the water and stopped at the north landing. One of the pale arcs followed exactly the same path. It began a little before the first circle, as though a fingertip had settled beside the market quay rather than directly upon its name. It curved over the blue line, widened slightly near the center, and faded just beyond the circle at the north landing. A second pale arc lay close beside it. A third crossed the route at a shallower angle, beginning near the quay and joining the line halfway across. Nora leaned back by a few inches. From that distance, the relationship became simpler. Someone reading the chart had looked at the key, found the blue line, and traced the short crossing. Another reader had done the same. Then another. The motion had been repeated often enough for fingertips to smooth the paper above the cloth. The marks were not stains. They were wear from use. Nothing had been added to the chart. A tiny amount of surface texture had been reduced, gradually and evenly, by generations of hands following the same ordinary route. Nora kept her own hands on the cotton cloth. There was no need to demonstrate the movement by touching the chart. The movement was already visible. It began at the quay or the market quay, crossed the short blue arc, and ended at the north landing. The variations showed how different fingers had found it. Some had traced carefully along the printed line. Some had taken the shortest curve between the two circles. One had apparently returned from north to market, leaving no indication except a slightly broader polished patch near the middle. Outside the window, a ferry light entered the visible strip of harbor. Nora glanced up. The low white lamp moved from the direction of the market quay toward the north landing. At this angle, the vessel itself was mostly a dark, level shape against darker water. The light was easier to see than the hull. It traveled at an even pace, with a narrow reflection beneath it. On the chart, the route occupied no more than the length of Nora's hand. Through the window, the crossing lasted long enough for the low engine note to reach the room, after the light had already passed the center of the view. The sound remained subdued by the stone walls and sheltered water. It continued toward the landing and softened there. Nora looked back at the pale arcs. The chart had translated that familiar movement into a line that could be found beneath a finger. The repeated tracing had not revealed a different route, or some forgotten feature of the harbor. It had confirmed the simplest use of the sheet. People had opened the working copy because they wanted to see the short crossing between two known places, and their hands had returned to it often enough to leave a smooth record. She lifted the magnifying lens from the side of the table. Holding it above the chart, she examined the beginning of one arc near the market quay. Under the lens, the undisturbed paper showed a fine, soft grain. The worn area showed the same fibers lying flatter, all in the direction of the curve. There were no particles lodged between them. No colored residue had gathered at the edge. The blue ink itself had thinned only at the highest points. She moved the lens above the center of the route. The smoothness widened there, where a finger would naturally have rested more fully while changing direction. Beyond the north landing, it narrowed and disappeared. That was enough. Nora returned the lens to its place. She took one of the blank slips and wrote the chart's temporary number at the top. Beneath it, she added a short observation in pencil. Repeated smooth arcs follow blue route from Market Quay to North Landing. She paused before the next line. The wording mattered because the next person should not have to rediscover the difference between a deposit and a polished surface. At the same time, the note did not need to turn a small fact into a long explanation. She wrote, "Handling wear from route tracing. Stable, retain." The pencil moved quietly over the slip. When she finished, she placed it beyond the upper margin of the chart, near the title and date slip, without allowing either note to rest on the printed face. The chart remained where it was. Nora looked across the other cloth-backed copies arranged in their colored rows. Several bore softened corners and rounded folds. One red route chart had a smooth patch beside its title. A yellow copy showed a pale band where hands had opened the first panel many times. Those signs belonged to the same broad history of handling, but they did not form the same precise pattern. The blue chart was different only in the usefulness of its wear. Its pale arcs showed how the sheet had been read. Nora brought the smaller brush close, then left it on the table. There were no loose fibers along the arcs and nothing to lift away. Brushing a stable, polished surface would not clarify it. Pressure from the bone folder would do even less good. The old tool remained above the work area, familiar and unused. She did not intend to flatten the pale curves. Flattening was not quite the right word in any case. The chart's folds might later receive support where the linen had weakened, but the smooth arcs were not ridges or distortions. They could not be pressed back into unworn texture. Any attempt to make them resemble the surrounding paper would mean obscuring the very use that made this working copy distinct. At the far end of the table, the 6 new folders stood in their row. Their dark green stitches crossed the pale linen spines at regular intervals. Each folder had enough depth to shelter a folded cloth-backed chart without forcing its hinges. Anika had left no decision attached to them. She had repaired the folders, Nora had signed the receipt, and the delivery was closed. The choice of what entered them belonged entirely to the work now on the table. Nora rose and walked to the far end. She opened the first folder. The boards lifted easily and rested at a supportive angle. just as they had during the brief inspection. Inside, the clean surface was unmarked. There was room for a chart slip near the front, and for a handling note that could be seen before the chart itself was unfolded. Nora measured the open folder with her gaze, then looked back toward the blue chart. Its folded dimensions would fit. The spine had enough allowance for the rounded linen hinges. No new crease would be required. Nothing about the folder would hide the pale arcs once the chart was opened, but its enclosure would prevent casual pressure from being mistaken for useful flattening. She closed the folder again. The decision had begun to take shape, though the chart was not ready to be placed inside. First, the observation should become a proper handling note. Then the other Blue Route copies needed to be checked for a suitable source, from which a touch copy could be prepared. The worn chart itself could remain available for supervised reading, while a facsimile carried the repeated movement of fingers in ordinary public use. That work belonged to the next stage. For now, Nora returned to her chair and examined the route key once more. The printed words remained plain: Market Quay, North Landing, Blue Route, Short Inner Crossing. Nothing concealed itself beneath the wear, and nothing beyond the chart was needed to understand it. She shifted the lamp back to earlier position. The smooth arcs became paler, but less bright. Seen in the even light, they resembled quiet paths across the printed water. Their edges merged gradually with the surrounding sheet. A person who looked quickly might still call them stains. A person who compared their shape with the key could see what they were. Nora added one final phrase to the working slip: compare with route key before handling. She read the note once, then set the pencil down. The open chart had changed only in its context. Loose fibers had already been removed during the first round, but the pale arcs remained exactly as Nora had found them. No treatment had covered them. No pressure had reduced them. Beside the chart, the written observation now protected their meaning from an easy mistake. Across the table, the sorted rows stayed in place. Paper copies rested to the left. Cloth-backed charts rested to the right, arranged by route color and printed date. The second layer remained inside the shallow box, undisturbed. 6 repaired folders waited beyond the rows. The dark tray held its small scatter of pale linen fibers. Outside, the ferry light completed its crossing and came to rest beyond the edge of the window. After a quiet interval, another regular light appeared farther along the harbor. Nora did not need to match it to a chart. Tonight's small question had already resolved itself on the short blue line before her. She slid a clean sheet of blotting paper beneath the working slips so they would remain together. Then she moved the first green thread folder from the far end of the table to the empty space beside the open chart. The folder stayed closed. The chart stayed open. Between them lay the handling note, ready for Nora's next round of work. Preserve the smooth route wear, shelter the original without forcing its folds, and prepare another copy for the hands that would still want to trace the familiar crossing from the Market Quay to the North Landing. Nora drew the closed green thread folder closer to the blue route chart. She left a hand's width between them. In that clear space rested the working slip, with its 3 short observations. The smooth arcs followed the route. The wear was stable, and it should be retained. The arrangement gave each part of the next task its own place. Original chart to the left, note in the center, empty folder to the right. The practical choice was now clear. The cloth-backed chart would not be pressed in an effort to make its surface look even. The pale arcs would remain visible, because they showed how the working copy had been used. Nora would place the chart in one of Anika's repaired folders, add a handling note where it could be read before the chart was opened, and use the matching unworn paper copy to make a full-size facsimile for touch. She began with the note. From the stack of blank slips, she selected one cut to fit inside the folder without projecting beyond its boards. The card was firm enough to remain flat, but light enough not to press into the folded chart. She set it on the blotting paper and wrote the catalog number at the upper left. Her pencil made a soft, measured sound. She did not copy every sentence from the temporary observation. A handling note needed to guide the next action, not preserve the whole process by which she had reached it. She wrote, "Smooth pale arcs are stable handling wear made by tracing the blue ferry route." Below that she added, "Do not press or surface clean these areas. Support folds when opening." On the final line she wrote, "Use facsimile for repeated touch." Nora read the 3 lines once. They distinguished the pale arcs from dirt. They protected them from unnecessary treatment. They also allowed the chart to remain useful. A reader could still examine the original when appropriate, while the repeated motion of following the route could be transferred to a copy made for handling. She placed the finished note inside the front board of the folder. Anika had sewn a narrow retaining band there, made from the same pale linen as the spine covering. Nora eased the lower edge of the card beneath it. The band held the note without adhesive. If the wording ever needed revision, the card could be removed and replaced without altering the folder. The dark green stitches remained visible along the inner hinge. Nora raised and lowered the front cover once, confirming that the note stayed in place. It did. The first folder was no longer entirely empty. Before anyone reached the chart, the reason for its preservation could now be understood. Nora turned to the paper copies arranged on the other side of the work cloth. The facsimile should come from the same issue. That would preserve the exact route key, landing names, and printed curve without requiring the worn original to be held flat for copying. During the first round, she had recorded dates and issue numbers. She brought the blue paper row nearer and compared its slips with the title block of the open cloth-backed chart. The earliest paper copy was too old. Its route line bent slightly farther south, and its key used an earlier landing symbol. The next had the correct date but a revised issue number. The third matched both. Nora opened it one panel at a time on a separate square of clean cloth. The paper made its light crackling sound, distinct from the dry murmur of the linen-backed working chart. Its blue line ran between the same open circles. The route key used the same wording. Even the small service mark beside the north landing matched. Unlike the original, its surface retained a soft, even grain. Nora set the 2 charts where she could compare them without overlap. She looked from the title of one to the title of the other, then from the printed key to the blue line. Date matched, issue number matched, printed scale matched. No handwritten addition appeared on either copy. No later printed correction distinguished one from the other. The paper chart could provide the image for a touch facsimile without borrowing anything from the worn surface, except the understanding of how people had used it. She wrote "Matched Sonko" on its working slip. The chart house used a contactless overhead copying method for flat and folded paper. The sheet rested face upward beneath the camera, supported on clean cloth, while the image was taken from above. No glass pressed upon the surface, and no chart had to be turned face down. It was a safe method for the unworn paper copy, provided the old folds were supported rather than forced flat. Nora carried the matching paper chart to the copying surface in the repair room. She opened it in the same sequence as before. Where the old folds rose slightly, she placed smooth, paper-wrapped supports beneath the neighboring panels. The chart settled into an even plane without pressure. Its corners remained free, and nothing touched the printed face. The cloth-backed original stayed on the central table. Its pale arcs remained under the steady lamp, well away from the copying surface. There could be no confusion about which object was being reproduced. The original was the thicker, linen-backed chart beside the green thread folder. The source was the unworn paper issue beneath the overhead camera. Nora adjusted the copying frame until the full printed border appeared within it. She left space beyond every edge. A handling facsimile should have broad margins, enough for a reader to steady the sheet without covering the market quay, north landing, route key, or blue line. The face would remain plain. Nothing would be added to the printed image. She checked the scale setting before making the copy. Full size, no enlargement, no reduction. The copying equipment gave a low, even working sound. There was no flash against the room, only the steady light already directed across the paper. Nora waited while the image was captured, then allowed the chart to remain supported until the full-size sheet emerged. The new sheet was warm white and slightly heavier than ordinary office paper. She lifted it by its broad margins. It was no longer blank. The blue route appeared clearly between its open circles. The printed key stood in the lower panel. The market quay and north landing were both complete, with clear space around them. A wide border of unprinted paper remained outside the chart image on all four sides. Nora carried the facsimile to the central table and placed it on a third clean area. The three objects now occupied distinct positions. The cloth-backed original lay to the left, with its visible pale arcs. The unworn paper source rested near the copying surface, marked by its matched Songso slip. The new full-size handling facsimile lay to the right, surrounded by broad, warm white margins. Two approved facsimile sheets remained blank beneath their temporary wrapper. Nora kept them there. Their clean white faces showed no route, no key, and no identifying mark. They were clearly unused stock, waiting for later copies rather than joining the finished sheet. She began the scale check. On the paper source, the printed scale bar ran beneath the route key. Nora measured its full length, then measured the same bar on the facsimile. They matched. She checked the distance between the center of the market quay circle and the center of the north landing circle. That matched as well. Finally, she compared the width and height of the printed border with the source. The facsimile had neither shortened the outer panels nor stretched the route across them. Its image was full size, while the added paper beyond the border provided the intended handling margins. Nora wrote the measurements on the working sheet, not on the face of the facsimile. Then she turned the new sheet over. The reverse was plain, without any printed route. At the lower right, well inside the broad margin, she wrote in graphite, "Full-size handling facsimile." Below it she added the catalog number of the cloth-backed original, the issue number of the paper source, and the two landing names. Market Quay, North Landing. On the final line she wrote the date of copying and her initials. She placed no mark on the front. When she turned the sheet face upward again, nothing interrupted the blue route. A reader could follow the familiar curve without meeting a modern arrow, label, or instruction. The broad margins made room for both hands, and the notation on the reverse distinguished the copy unmistakably from the original. Nora placed a clean slip above it. Facsimile 1, Kyle and margins checked. She did not call the other two sheets facsimiles. They remained blank sheets inside the wrapper. On the wrapper she wrote, "2 blank sheets. Further touch, copies to prepare." The distinction was visible across the table. 1 completed handling facsimile carried the route. 2 unused sheets carried nothing. The original retained the pale paths made by earlier hands. Nora returned to the cloth-backed chart. Before folding it, she removed the paper-wrapped weight and allowed the upper panel to rise naturally. The linen hinge lifted in a broad curve. She supported it with one hand beneath the backing, while the other guided the panel over. The pale arcs disappeared from view one section at a time. They were not concealed by treatment. They were simply returned to the chart's established folds. North Landing folded inward first. The middle of the short route followed. Market quay and the printed key remained visible until the final panel came down. She applied no pressure with her fingertips. The old folds knew where to rest. Each rounded linen hinge settled into its familiar position, leaving the packet slightly thicker at the center than a paper chart would have been. The folder, inherited from Nora's former workshop, still lay near the upper edge of the cotton cloth. She picked it up, feeling its familiar polished surface in her palm. For a moment, she held it above the work. Tonight, the right use of that experience was to know when not to press. She set the bone folder beside the folder's front board. Then she opened the green thread folder fully. The inner space was deep enough for the rounded folds. Nora lifted the closed chart with both hands, keeping its panels supported from below, and lowered it into the center. It rested between the boards without touching the stitched hinge. There was room at the head and foot. The foredge did not project. When she lowered the front board, it met no resistance from the linen packet. Nora closed the folder. Along the spine, the dark green thread formed an even row. Nothing had been forced thinner. Nothing shifted when she moved the folder a few inches toward the sorted blue charts. She reopened it once. The handling note appeared first. Beneath it, the cloth-backed chart rested in its folded form. A future reader would encounter the explanation before reaching for the chart, and a future conservator would not mistake the pale arcs for something to remove. Nora closed the folder again. On the working inventory, she wrote, Folder 1, Hold for approval. The chart had been safely housed, and one real handling facsimile had been made and checked. But the ferry chart work was not finished. The second layer still remained in the shallow box. 5 repaired folders still waited. 2 more handling copies remained to be prepared. Final approval would follow only after the other cloth-backed charts and their enclosures had been reviewed. Nora moved to the remaining blue root copies. She looked only for the ordinary conditions relevant to folder preparation. A weak fold, a projecting edge, a thickness that needed more room, or loose fibers still resting along the linen. One chart required no more than its catalog slip. Another had a shallow fold that opened comfortably but would benefit from a support note. A third blue chart shared the same short route but came from a later issue. Its surface held no repeated arcs. The landing symbols had become solid circles, and the key had moved to the upper margin. Nora compared it briefly with the worn copy, then returned it to date order. The difference supported her choice without enlarging it into a theory. The pale arcs belonged to the use of one working chart. They did not need to appear on every copy to be meaningful. At the far end of the table, Nora opened a second green thread folder. She checked its spine depth against another cloth-backed chart and placed the chart inside without yet adding a final handling note. A third folder received the copy with the stable old repair strip, along with a temporary slip asking for a check under even daylight. These were preparations, not approvals. The remaining 3 folders stayed empty. Nora gathered the loose working slips for the blue route and aligned them against the edge of the blotting paper. Here the bone folder was useful. She placed its flat side beside the slips as a gentle guide while she brought the paper edges into line. It touched no old chart and made no new crease. A wide paper band held the slips together without adhesive. On its face she wrote, Blue Moot reviewed this round. The red, yellow, and green rows remained undisturbed. The second layer of the box remained where it was. Nora closed the matching paper source in reverse order and returned it to its marked place. She laid the completed facsimile flat beside it, face upward, with its checked slip above the broad margin. The wrapper holding the 2 blank sheets stayed separate. Nothing could be mistaken for anything else. Original in the green thread folder. Matched paper source beneath its working slip. 1 full-size handling facsimile with identification on the reverse. 2 blank sheets enclosed and labeled for later copying. Outside, the ferry on the short route made another crossing. Its low white light moved across the window at the same measured pace Nora had seen earlier. A route, followed by lights across water, had also been followed by fingers across paper. The old chart would keep the smooth record of those earlier hands. The full-size facsimile could receive the next repeated touch. Nora looked over the work table. 3 folders now held prepared cloth-backed charts. 3 folders remained empty. The first handling facsimile lay broad-margined and clearly identified. 2 blank sheets waited in their wrapper. The brush tray held the pale fibers removed during sorting. The blue route notes rested within their paper band. Nothing suggested that the whole task was finished. It suggested that the next part would be straightforward. Nora slid the first folder into line with the other 2 prepared folders. Their spines faced outward. Along the nearest one, dark green thread crossed pale linen in small regular stitches. She placed the completed facsimile beside the copying records, ready to travel with the work on the return path. Then she set the wrapper of blank sheets behind it, where its label remained visible. The stage was stable now. The useful wear had been understood and allowed to remain. The original was supported. One clearly marked, full-size handling facsimile had been made, measured, and given broad margins. The remaining blank sheets waited without pretending to be finished work. Nora rested both hands on the back of the chair. Beyond the window, the ferry light continued its familiar path across the sheltered harbor. Inside, the first housed chart lay quiet between its boards. The checked facsimile rested apart from it, and the green thread spine stood ready for the work to move gently on. Nora let the next ferry light pass beyond the window before she moved from the chair. The work table no longer held a mixed beginning. Paper charts rested to the left, cloth-backed charts to the right. 3 cloth-backed copies rested in green thread folders, though only the first had received its full handling note. 3 folders remained empty. The lower layer of the shallow box still waited beneath the sorted work. The evening's question had been answered, but the ferry chart preparation was not yet ready for its final quiet check. Nora knew what the pale arcs were and why they should remain. 1 full-size handling facsimile had been made from the matching paper source, with its scale, margins, and identifying details checked. Before she began the route back to the cupboard, the remaining cloth-backed copies still needed review, and all 6 repaired folders needed an appropriate use. She started with the shallow box. The second layer contained fewer items than the first. Nora lifted them one at a time, supporting each folded packet beneath its widest panel. 2 were paper charts, both late issues of the Red Route. 1 was a yellow route timetable printed on paper and folded inside a plain wrapper. The remaining 4 were cloth-backed working copies. She placed the paper material with the rose on the left. Then she brought the first cloth-backed copy to the clean cotton cloth and opened it far enough to read its title block. It belonged to the green route. 3 loose fibers lay along its outer fold. Nora guided them into the dark tray with the soft brush. She opened the next panel and found the date without forcing the broad linen hinge. The printed surface was stable. Its folds were rounded but firm, and no edge projected beyond the packet when it was closed. She added the date to its slip and placed it in the green row. The next cloth-backed copy belonged to the red route. Its first fold opened comfortably, but the second had become soft, where the linen had carried much of the chart's weight. Nora supported the fold from beneath and examined it under even light. The weave remained continuous. It required no repair tonight, only a note reminding the next handler to support the central panel. She wrote the instruction on a removable card. The third cloth-backed copy also belonged to the yellow route. Its title block identified it as a later issue than the yellow chart already resting in the third green thread folder. Nora recorded its date and issue number on a fresh slip. This later yellow copy carried no repair strip. Its linen backing showed plainly at the exposed margins, and its folds opened in broad, even hinges. Nora checked its folded width against the earlier yellow chart's dimensions on the working slip. The two copies belonged to the same root group and would fit within one folder without pressure. She closed the later issue and placed it in the yellow row. The final cloth-backed copy in the box was another Blue Route issue. Its date had been hidden inside the folded packet. Nora opened the panels in sequence, recorded the year, and compared its root key with the other blue copies. It showed the same short crossing from the Market Quay to the North Landing, but its paper surface held no polished arcs. The folds showed ordinary use and nothing more. It did not require a touch facsimile of its own. The full-size copy already prepared from the matched source served the repeated tracing that had made the worn chart distinctive. Nora looked at the wrapper containing the two blank sheets. The earlier wording had treated further touch copies as an intended part of the work. The review had made them unnecessary. There was one handling need, one matched source, and one measured facsimile. Producing additional copies merely because blank sheets were present would not improve the collection. She removed the temporary label from the wrapper. The sheets remained clean and unused. Nora returned them to the copying stock beneath the side table, where they had rested before she set them aside. On the copying record she wrote, "One handling facsimile. Blue Moot, Market Quay to North Landing." Below it she added, "Matched Socko, full size, Kyle and Margins checked." The copying work now had a definite limit. Nora reviewed the cloth-backed rows from blue through green. She opened each copy, only as far as needed to confirm its date, issue, fold condition, and suitable enclosure. Charts with a shared root and compatible folded dimensions could rest together in a folder, separated by broad archival slips. No folder would be overfilled, and no linen hinge would be compressed. She opened the second green thread folder, which already held a Blue Route chart provisionally. Its spine allowed room for the later blue issue from the lower layer. Nora placed a broad separator between the two copies and added a front card listing both catalog numbers in date order. The first folder remained reserved for the worn Blue Route chart. Its full handling note appeared before the chart, and the folder held nothing else. She opened the third folder. The earlier yellow route chart remained where Nora had placed it during the previous round. Its stable old paper repair strip lay inside the folded packet, and the temporary slip requesting an even light check rested at the front. Nora drew the chart forward on its support and opened only the panels needed to see the strip. Under the repair room lamp, the old paper lay flat. Its edges did not lift, and the surrounding surface showed no stiffness. She removed the temporary wording and replaced it with a shorter observation. Old repair strip stable. No treatment required. Then she closed the chart along its familiar folds and returned it to the third folder. The later yellow route issue from the second layer matched its folded width. Nora placed a broad separator over the earlier chart and lowered the later issue beside it without shifting the first. On the contents card, she listed both catalog numbers in date order, distinguishing the earlier repaired copy from the later unrepaired issue. The boards closed without pressure. The three empty folders now received the remaining root groups. The fourth held the red root working copies. Nora placed the copy with the softened central fold on top so its support note would be seen first. The other red copy rested beneath a separator. When she lowered the front board, the spine retained its natural depth. The fifth held the green route copies, including the chart from which she had brushed 3 loose fibers. Their folds alternated at the thickest edges, keeping the folder level. The sixth received the remaining cloth-backed chart, whose issue did not share a suitable root group. Its contents card identified it plainly, and its folded packet rested centered between the boards. Nora opened and closed each folder once. No chart projected at the head or foot. No foredge pressed against a board. The retaining bands held the notes without adhesive. The dark green stitches remained even along every spine. She brought the 6 folders into one row. The first held the worn Blue Root original alone. The second held 2 later Blue Root issues. The third held the 2 Yellow Root copies. The earlier chart with its stable repair strip and the distinct later issue from the lower layer. The fourth held the Red Route group, the fifth the Green Route group, and the sixth the remaining single copy. Nora took the working inventory and recorded the contents proposed for all 6 folders. She left hold for approval beside the first folder, then made a light pencil mark beside each line, as she compared it with the cards in front of her. The marks were working marks only. She did not sign the inventory or replace its provisional heading. One final pass through the folder cards would remain. After the room had quieted further, the shallow box could now receive the paper material. A few pale threads and grains of dust lay against the wood. Nora held the box over the dark tray and used the smaller brush to draw them gently from one corner. She did not polish the wood or disturb Jonas's original blue pencil label. The paper copies went back inside, separated by root color with broad slips and arranged by printed date. The yellow timetable kept its plain wrapper. The matching blue paper source returned to its proper root group, held within a loose band marked Matched Dansko. Facsimile made. Their sharp folds made an even layer. Nothing heavier rested above them now that the cloth-backed working copies had their own folders. Nora lowered the lid. She took a fresh card cut to fit the brass holder. Jonas's earlier blue pencil label still recorded the box's original mixed condition. Ferry charts, cloth and paper, mixed. Nora left that card with the working records. On the new one she wrote, Ferry charts. Paper copies, by moot and date. Below it she added, cloth-backed copies in 6 green 3 folders. She slipped the card into the holder. Beside the box the handling facsimile lay face upward. The blue route crossed from the market quay to the north landing at full size. Broad warm white margins surrounded the printed border. Nora turned it over once. The graphite identification remained clear. Full-size handling facsimile, the catalog number of the worn cloth-backed original, the issue number of the paper source, the 2 landing names, the copying date, and her initials. She compared those details with the copying record. They agreed. She returned the sheet face upward and placed the checked slip above its margin. Handling facsimile. Kyle and margins checked. The paper charts were closed inside their labeled box. Every cloth-backed copy had one continuous place within the 6 folders. The single useful touch facsimile rested apart from both. The working inventory remained unsigned, waiting for its last quiet comparison. Nora began the physical return path. She placed both hands beneath the shallow box and lifted. Its weight was lighter without the cloth-backed copies, and the paper inside remained level. She carried it from the repair room into the long map room at an unhurried pace. The windows had darkened to broad panes reflecting the lamps within. Beyond those reflections, a regular white ferry light crossed the water and emerged again nearer the landing. At the end of the long table stood the reading stand, where the repaired blue cloth walking map rested in its protective support. Nearby, the transparent rain overlay lay in its sleeve. Both remained repaired, recorded, and ready for use. The reading room atlas remained empty. Nora did not open it. Tonight's useful result belonged beside the working charts and the earlier walking map. Nothing in the ferry chart preparation called for an atlas entry. She set the shallow box on the long table, well away from the reading stand, and returned to the repair room for the facsimile. She carried it flat between two clean support boards. At the reading stand, she removed the upper board and placed the finished sheet beside the blue cloth walking map. The facsimile remained outside the empty atlas. Its broad margins were ready for the fingers that might follow the short crossing. The worn cloth-backed original would keep the smooth record of earlier hands within its first green thread folder. That was the answer the evening had required. Nora returned to the long table, lifted the shallow box, and carried it into the print cupboard. The shelf from which she had taken it remained open. She lowered the box into place and slid it back only far enough to sit securely. The new label faced outward. She returned for the folders in 2 journeys. The first 3 came together in a supported stack, with the worn blue route chart on top. Nora set them beside the box, their spines facing outward. Then she brought the remaining 3 and continued the row. 6 folders rested on the cleared shelf. Nora adjusted the lower edges until they aligned. She used no pressure beyond the touch needed to bring the boards even. Their differing contents showed in small variations at the 4 edges. But each spine had enough room. She placed the working inventory beside them, with its unsigned heading visible. The final verification would be simple and reversible. Open each folder only far enough to see its front card, compare the catalog numbers with the inventory, and confirm the box entry. No chart would need to be unfolded, and no new decision would be required. Nora left the pencil with the inventory. Then she carried the brush tray back to the repair room. The pale fibers against its dark lining required no further interpretation. She placed the smaller brush across the upper edge and the larger brush beside it, bristles clear of the lint. The cotton cloth remained on the central table. Nora lifted it by 2 corners and let its shallow creases relax. No chart lay beneath it. No slip had been caught in its folds. She spread it again across the surface. Her bone folder rested near the top edge. She picked it up and turned it once in her hand. Its polished surface had guided the alignment of the working slips, but it had not touched the worn arcs or pressed the old linen hinges. Nora laid it parallel to the blotting paper. Through the window, another ferry light moved along the short inner route. Nora did not step nearer. The printed curve had been understood. The original was sheltered. The one useful facsimile waited beside the walking map. For now, the route had narrowed to the known rooms. Repair room to long map room. Long map room to print cupboard. Print cupboard back to the quiet table. Nora made the return without carrying anything. She paused at the cupboard doorway and looked once at the shelf. The new box label was square in its holder. Beside it, 6 closed folders rested in line. The dark green thread crossed each pale spine in the same steady rhythm. The working inventory waited beside them, with a pencil near its lower edge. Its final pass would ask only for the comparison already prepared. Card, line, folder. Card, line, folder. After that, the provisional heading could be settled. Nora left the cupboard lamp on at its lowest setting. The softened light kept the folder cards legible, without brightening the long map room. Nothing on the shelf needed to move before the quiet verification. She walked back toward the repair room at an unhurried pace. Behind her, the paper charts rested in the returned box, and every cloth-backed chart remained in its assigned green thread folder. In the long map room, the facsimile lay beside the blue cloth walking map and outside the empty atlas. Ahead, the cotton cloth, brush tray, blotting paper, and familiar bone folder waited in the lamplight. The discovery was resolved. The physical route had been made. Only the small established check remained, ready to be completed without reopening the evening's question. Nora stood for a moment inside the repair room doorway. The route behind her had already narrowed. The shallow box rested on its shelf in the print cupboard with its new label facing outward. Beside it, the 6 repaired folders formed an even row, each holding its assigned cloth-backed chart or root group. One ordinary task remained. Nora returned to the cupboard while the low lamp still made the contents cards legible. The working inventory lay beside the folders, its provisional heading visible at the top and 5 light pencil marks dissenting beside the folder entries. She set the sheet on the open shelf and took up the pencil. Without unfolding any chart, she drew the first folder forward just far enough to read its visible card. The catalog number matched the first inventory line. The worn Blue Root working copy, housed alone with its handling note. Nora returned the folder to the row. The second card listed the 2 later Blue Root issues in date order. Its numbers matched the second line. The third card matched the 2 Yellow Route copies, including the chart with the stable old repair strip. The fourth identified the Red Route group and its support note. The fifth listed the Green Route copies. Each card agreed with its corresponding inventory line. Nora drew the 6th folder forward by the edge of its board. Its visible card identified the remaining cloth-backed chart, housed alone. She compared the number with the 6th line and made the final light check mark. Then she looked at the box entry below the folder list. Ferry charts. Paper copies by Moot and Dat. The wording matched the new card in the brass label holder. The matching source for the facsimile was included in the Blue Route paper group, just as the inventory recorded. Nora crossed out the provisional heading with one straight pencil line. Above it she wrote, "Approved in Vetni." At the foot of the sheet she added the date and signed her name. The correction could still be read beneath the new heading. The contents cards could still be removed from their retaining bands. Nothing about the check had required a chart to be opened, and nothing had changed inside the folders. Nora set the approved inventory beside the box where it could be found without moving the row. She returned the pencil to the lower edge of the sheet and lowered the cupboard lamp. All 6 folders were approved. The evening's work was complete. She walked back to the repair room without carrying anything. The cotton cloth covered the central table. Its shallow creases ran from the center toward the edges, left by the charts that had rested there. A few threads of lamplight caught its weave. At the upper edge lay the bone folder inherited from her former workshop, parallel to the smooth blotting paper. Nora adjusted the bone folder by the width of one finger. Its long side now matched the edge of the blotter. The movement made no sound beyond a soft touch against the table. The familiar tool remained where it would be easy to find on another evening, though no further use was asked of it tonight. Beside the cloth sat the brush tray. The detached linen fibers showed clearly against its dark lining. Some were short and straight. Some had curled after resting for years inside rounded folds. A few grains of dust lay among them. The smaller brush rested across the upper rim, and the larger one lay beside the tray with its bristles turned away. Nora lifted the smaller brush. She held it above the tray and gave its handle one gentle turn between her fingers. No fiber clung to the bristles. Nothing fell. She lowered it again so that its soft tip remained clear of the gathered lint. Then she turned the larger brush until its handle lay parallel to the tray. The brushes had done the only work needed from them. They had carried loose fibers away from the linen folds, without disturbing anything still attached. The cloth-backed charts had not been scoured or made to look unused. Their surfaces remained their own. Through the doorway, Nora could see part of the cupboard shelf. The box appeared first, a low gray shape beneath its label holder. Beyond it, the folder spines continued in a pale line. The dark green stitches were dim at this distance, but their regular spacing was still visible. The evening had left no chart open beneath the lamp. No paper edge projected from under the cotton cloth. The paper copies were arranged by root and date inside the shallow box. The cloth-backed copies rested within the repaired folders, separated where needed. with their contents cards and handling notes in place. The first folder held the blue route working copy with the smooth pale arcs. Its handling note rested beneath the retaining band. The chart remained folded along its familiar linen hinges, neither pressed nor altered. The pale arcs followed the printed line from the market quay to the north landing. They had been made by fingers tracing the short crossing, and they would remain on the chart. The matching paper source was back inside the ferry chart box, held in its proper route and date by the loose band marked Matched Songso facsimile made. It had supplied the image without requiring the worn original to be pressed beneath the copying frame. The verified full-size handling facsimile rested beside the approved blue cloth walking map and outside the empty reading room atlas. Its scale and broad margins matched the source. The graphite note on its reverse distinguished it from the original. The route remained clear on its face, ready for hands to follow. The transparent rain overlay remained protected in its sleeve. Each object had kept the state it had already earned. Nora placed both hands on the near edge of the table, simply feeling the smooth wood beneath her palms. The close work had left her fingers comfortably aware of texture. She could still recall the light crackle of the paper charts and the softer response of their linen-backed working copies. The paper had held its sharp folds. The linen had opened in broad, rounded hinges. Those differences no longer needed to be tested. They had become part of the settled arrangement. Paper copies together in the labeled box, cloth-backed copies, sheltered in folders made with enough depth for their folds. Nora released the table and stood easily upright. Her shoulders had lowered since she carried the shallow box from the cupboard. Her hands were warm. Her pace had grown slower through the return path, and now there was almost no pace left to keep. Beyond the open window, water moved against the stone quay. The sound gathered quietly, touched the wall, and withdrew. Another small movement followed. Between them lay enough stillness for the soft vibration of a ferry engine to pass across the sheltered harbor. One regular white light moved through the visible strip of water. Its reflection extended beneath it, broke into short, pale pieces, and gathered again. The vessel itself remained a level darkness behind the lamp. The light moved in the direction of the north landing. Nora did not trace the route with her hand. The printed line had already been compared with the worn arcs. That observation had guided the handling note, the folder choice, and the preparation of the facsimile. She watched until the light reached the edge of the window frame. Then it passed from view. The low engine note remained for a little longer. It softened against the stone walls and settled into the broader sound of water. Nora turned from the window. The lamp above the central table made a calm oval over the cotton cloth. At its edges, the room had begun to lose detail. The grain of the table remained visible near the chair. Farther away, the side table and doorway were softer shapes. She drew the blotting paper a fraction farther from the cloth. The movement aligned it with the bone folder and left a narrow strip of bare table between the two surfaces. The sheet slid without bending, its edge remaining smooth. There was nothing beneath it. Nora checked this by sight rather than lifting it. The paper rested evenly from corner to corner. No slip made a ridge. No fiber showed at its edge. She smoothed no crease from the cotton cloth. Its shallow lines could remain until the next use. Like the rounded hinges in the charts, they showed only where material had rested and then been removed. Nora took one step toward the doorway. From there, the print cupboard shelf came more fully into view. The cupboard lamp was off, but light from the long map room reached the folder spines at a low angle. The pale linen looked warmer than it had beneath the direct repair room lamp. The green thread appeared nearly black where it passed into each spine. Across the exposed sections, the color returned. Deep green, quiet and even. Each stitch entered, crossed, and entered again. The 6 repaired folders held the same rhythm, despite the small differences in their contents. Nora went no farther. A full circuit of the house would have added nothing. The model room remained closed, as it had all evening. The window gallery was beyond the bounded route of the shift. The work had moved only between the print cupboard, the long map room, and the repair room, and that route had brought every chart to its resting place. The useful path was short now. Repair table, map room doorway, print cupboard shelf. Her gaze moved along it once without her feet following. At the table, the brush tray held the loose fibers. Through the doorway, the long map room reflected its lamps in the dark windows. On the cupboard shelf, the sorted box and 6 folders rested together. Nora returned her attention to the tray. The pale lint could remain against the dark lining. It was gathered and contained, away from the cotton cloth and blotting paper. It asked for no further examination. She moved the tray inward by less than the width of her palm. It now sat fully within the table's edge. The brushes remained balanced as she moved it. No fiber shifted beyond the lining. When she stopped, the tray was stable and square to the cotton cloth. Nora placed the larger brush above it, leaving the bristles unsupported and clear. The smaller brush remained across the rim. Both could wait without pressure on their soft ends. A narrow band of lamplight rested on the bone folder. Years of handling had polished it, though differently from the pale arcs on the ferry chart. Tonight it had served as a guide for aligning slips. It had remained away from the old chart when pressure would have been the wrong choice. Nora left it where it was. Her hands no longer needed a tool. She drew the chair close to the table, leaving enough space that its back did not touch the cloth. The chair legs moved over the floor with a low, brief sound. When they stopped, the repair room became quiet again. Nora sat. Her feet rested flat. Her back found the chair without effort. She placed her hands loosely in her lap. From this lower position, the central table rose between her and the window. The cotton cloth became a pale, level field. The blotting paper and bone folder formed 2 quiet lines at its upper edge. The tray made a low, dark shape beside them. No work projected upward asking to be resumed. The shallow box was closed. The folders were closed. The chart with the worn root was closed within its folder. Its pale arcs remained present even though they could no longer be seen. They did not require display in order to be preserved. The handling note would appear before the chart whenever the folder opened again. Until then, the linen-backed sheet could rest along the folds it had known for years. The other cloth-backed charts rested in the same manner. Their separators lay between compatible copies. The support note for the softened red root fold would be seen before the chart was handled. The stable yellow repair strip needed nothing more. Outside, the regular ferry light appeared again. Nora saw only its reflection at first, a thin white length moving between the darker reflections of the room. Then the lamp itself entered the clear portion of the pane. It crossed slowly, with the same measured movement as before. Small ripples lengthened the reflection. The white line divided and joined. Behind it, the water returned to its ordinary dark surface. Nora's breathing had become as unhurried as the crossing. There was no count to keep. The visible order on the shelf was enough. The new box label described the arrangement. The signed inventory accounted for every folder. The contents cards would guide the next opening. Nothing depended on one more note. The ferry light moved beyond the window frame. Its reflection shortened and disappeared. The engine note followed at a distance until water against stone became the clearer sound again. Nora waded through one quiet wash along the quay wall. Then another. She rose from the chair. Her hands remained empty. She stood beside the table and let the arranged surfaces register in their resting state. Cotton cloth, blotting paper, bone folder, brush tray. Nothing was added to them. She lowered the repair room lamp. The circle of light contracted. The weave of the cotton cloth became less distinct. The bone folder's bright edge softened. The pale fibers in the tray faded into its dark lining, still gathered and contained. Light from the long map room was enough for the short path to the doorway. Nora walked there slowly. The windows beyond the map room now held more reflection than harbor. Between those reflections, distant ferry lights continued their regular movement. One passed behind the dark shape of a cabinet as seen in the glass, then emerged on the other side. The rhythm belonged to the harbor whether Nora watched or not. She stopped at the print cupboard opening. The cupboard remained dark. She did not turn its lamp on again. The new label on the shallow box could still be made out in the borrowed light. Its lettering sat square in the holder. Beside the box, the folder boards formed a low, even line. The approved inventory rested where she had left it, its signed lower edge just visible. Nora placed 2 fingertips against the outer edge of the nearest folder. She moved it inward by a fraction until its lower edge matched the folder beside it. None of the boards opened. None of the charts shifted. She withdrew her hand. 6 spines faced outward. Their contents made some folders slightly fuller than others, but each had room for the folded linen within. Along the shelf, the sewn spines remained aligned. The blue root chart rested behind the first, its smooth arcs left untouched. The other folders held their assigned charts in the order recorded on their cards. The sorted paper box stood beside them. Farther back in the long map room, the verified facsimile rested beside the approved blue cloth walking map and outside the empty atlas. Nothing more entered the evening. Nora let her hand rest at her side. Then she turned away from the shelf, leaving the 6 closed folders aligned in the softened light, with the dark green thread visible along every spine.